Hey, good people. Grits or cream of wheat? Who the hell is racist? Does anyone ever ask could they touch your hair?
Black Like Me.
You're listening to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G., a podcast that invites you to experience the world through the perspective of one black man, one conversation, one story, or even one rant at a time. Here's Dr. G.
Black Like Me.
Hey, Black Like Me podcast family members. I want to let you know that we have some brand new Patreon supporters. I wish I had a bell or something around here that I could ring. This is really exciting. So Andrea Dearlove, Nicole Fromm, and Patrick Ryan. I want to thank you for being our 3 newest Patreon supporters. That's great because that level of support allows us to continue to bring you great programming. And so we want more people to do this. So keep listening, click the link, and see what level might work for you. I'm really excited about this. Hey, I want to have a little fun with something also. Every state in the union is listening to Black Like Me, has downloaded Black Like Me, except for 4 states. So I'm doing a shout out to all of my Black Like Me listeners. And this is not to put any state on blast or embarrass them. It's really meant to be fun. I just want to bring them into the family. But if you know people in Montana, in both of the Dakotas, South and North Dakota, and West Virginia, I need you to call your friends, your cousins, your colleagues, send them a link and just say, hey, come on. You know, you got to listen to one of these podcasts. Send them a link to the one you think might pertain to them. But I want to be able to say we have listeners in all 50 states. So please, again, that's Montana, South Dakota, North Dakota, and West Virginia. Black Like Me podcast family, I know that you can help me get to these 4 states. Let's do this. After last week's podcast where we talked about it was another installment in our genealogy series, but it was entitled Intersectionality, and it really talked about the strife between black women and white women, or the relationship or lack thereof between black women and white women. We have had incredible feedback on that. I think we've had more text and phone calls immediately after an episode has dropped with this particular episode than any that I can think of in the past year or so. So I'm very, very excited about that. That was about Meg, Roy, and my daughter Lexi, both of whom are descendants of Robyn Joshua G. So if you've not listened to that, go and listen to it because it's really, really powerful. And again, it just gives us a framework. Where else do you get to listen to a black woman and a white woman who are descendants of the same guy, but through 2 women that he was with, talking together 150, 160 years later about how that has had an impact on the relationships between black and white women. You want to hear that. And hey, speaking of relationships between black and white women, this next episode is going to be fire also. And in this next episode, I'm talking with Robyn DAngelo, and a theme that comes up is something that I call white woman's tears. And we talk about the role or that plays, or even the roadblock that offers in race relations. This is a very truth-telling, insightful, very honest dialogue. And I think this is just going to blow your socks off. And so as you're listening to this upcoming episode, I hope that you have a different understanding, or you loosen your grip on your heart and your mind so that you might understand what racism really looks and feels like. When I talk to people about their racism, my white friends about their racism, it's not because I want to accuse them. You need to be freed of some things. And so I hope that this episode will help you to look at things a little differently. It's one of my favorite interviews. So enjoy this segment and holler at me. Let me know what you think about it. One of the reasons I started the Black Like Me podcast is because I want to encourage people to think about race relations in America and the world and to be able to talk about it. Today, I'm really excited and honored to have on my show Dr. Robyn DAngelo. She's an amazing thinker and educator who hit the scene some years ago by coining a phrase, white fragility, and writing about it. She received her PhD in multicultural education from the University of Washington in Seattle. She earned her tenure at Westfield State University in Massachusetts, and she's currently the affiliate associate professor of education at the University of Washington. She has this background in talking with white people about white fragility and helping to understand why racial discussions are so, so important. And I've been needing to have a discussion with Dr. DiAngelo for many, many years. And I'm so glad that our paths have crossed. Dr. DiAngelo, thank you so much for being my guest on Black Like Me today.
Well, I'm just thrilled to be your guest. Thank you.
Sure. Listen, I know that your schedule is busy, so I appreciate your time. You and I were talking off air a little bit that we have a mutual acquaintance, Eddie Moore Jr., who does the White Privilege Conference. And I was in Seattle when you were a plenary speaker at one of his regional gatherings, and my plane landed too late. I had to get my rental car. I just missed your keynote, but we were in the same space. But I heard that you tore it up. And I just think that it's just great to meet colleagues who are committed to this area of work. So I'm really, really excited about getting into our discussion and just finding out a little bit more about each other. And so you're known for having written White Fragility, but you've also written What Does It Mean to Be White, and Is Everyone Really Equal? So you've been contributing to this area of thought for a number of years, and you have a number of pieces out there that talk about it. And I know that that's got to be gratifying, but it's also got to be, it's got to make you weary a little bit talking about this all the time, I would imagine.
Well, so you named the books that I've written, but also, many, many, many articles. And my objective is always to take everyday familiar white racial dynamics and make them really clear and visible. And in fact, I don't ever get tired of talking about it. There's nothing I'd rather be talking about because it's so incredibly important, particularly in this cultural and political moment. I am a deep believer that if I'm not making some kind of difference, if I'm not continually being challenged myself, then I'm not sure what my life's purpose is. And so I do get gratified. And looking into the face of white apathy on racism day in and day out is discouraging, yes.
Wow. You're right. You're right. I hear you. One of the questions I have for you, and I'm sure you get asked this all the time, but just for our listeners, many of whom may be just now introduced to your work, what was the aha moment for you? I mean, your PhD is in multicultural education, and there's an aspect of us, those of us who are academics, where it's head knowledge or something that we're really passionate about learning, or something we want to learn about. But then there are personal moments where a light goes on and we realize this is part of my purpose, and there's sort of a calling or a mandate to really address this. Do you remember what that was for you?
Yeah, I'm a little bit different in terms of being an academic in that most academics go from theory to practice, and I went from practice to theory. So I was working out in the field, as what was called at the time a diversity trainer in multiracial teams for years before I went to get my PhD. It was such an extraordinary experience as a white person to as my job to go in and try to talk to overwhelmingly white groups of people about racism. I mean, most of us who are white avoid doing that at all costs.
Sure.
We talk about racism in lots of indirect ways, but not so much directly. I really wanted to apply all that I had learned and experienced during those years to academia so that I could disseminate that knowledge in a wider way. So for me, it actually wasn't a single moment. I see it a lot like water dripping on a rock for white people to see racism and our role in it. And even today, right, the forces to not see this for those of us who are white are so seductive and so strong. And so I can never be complacent and never just take for granted that I get it. Because every moment that I push against the message that white is ideal, right, the messages of white supremacy and superiority, those messages are coming right back at me. But there was a process that led to my ability to articulate what I'm able to now, and that was taking a job where I was, one, working side by side with people of color who were challenging the way that I saw the world. Mm-hmm. And part of being white is that I could have an advanced degree and never have had my worldview challenged as a white person. I wouldn't even been able to tell you I had a racial worldview, right? I'm just a human. I'm just a person. You know how we get conditioned, those of us who are white. So I was working side by side with people of color, and then I was trying to talk to white people. You want to understand how white people pull off living in such a profoundly separate and unequal society at the same time that we claim that we were taught to see everybody the same and our race has no meaning. All you have to do is try to talk to white people about race. Just
Right.
This is what I would say to white people who always want to know, what do I do? Well, there are lots of answers to that question, but one is go out and start talking to your fellow white people about race and racism and stick with the conversation. And you will learn everything you need to know about how white people pull this off.
Oh, definitely. And I will tell you, having grown up in Madison, I know you were here just a few months ago. I had a conflict, so I wasn't able to go to the event. So some of my friends reached out to you to see if we could see if you could appear in the show. But I realized that for our class reunions, I helped to organize our 30th and 35th class reunions. And my classmates have been reading about some of the work that I've done. There's a movement that we've created called Justified Anger, and it's really calling for systemic change and calling on our white allies to help us dismantle white constructs, social constructs that are providing barriers to Black folks and people of color. And these are folks, we had gym class together, we showered together, we were friends together, we were at each other's homes, but it was so easy to say, but Alex, in high school, we didn't see race. What happened to Madison? And so I'm realizing that it's so tough for people because they've grown up in a world to believe that Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and the Kennedys all helped to eradicate all of this, and it really doesn't exist anymore. And so they want to know what's happened since they've left Madison, because they just assumed, because we all grew up in the area of Brian's song, this was not an issue growing up. It's just that we never talked about it, but it was always an issue with 2 or 3% of the total population being non-white.
Right. And so you're talking about your
my white friends,
right?
Exactly.
This is what I would say to them who want to claim that in high school, you didn't know anything, you didn't see anything. If they're married, open up their wedding albums and look through them, right? Our weddings, big or small, are circles, right? Who's really sitting at the table, right? We might go to a school.
And you're not talking about the crew that cleans up after the wedding or the cooks. You're talking about wedding parties.
Exactly. I mean, I'm fairly confident their wedding albums are, if not 100% white, but pretty darn close.
Yes.
So, we're learning our place. And I would challenge this idea that we didn't know anything or see anything. This idea that white people are innocent on race, it's not true.
Sure.
Young people are not more innocent than older people either.
Exactly. I also read one of your quotes that the younger generation is not getting better at this. In fact, things are probably getting saucier. But one of the things, I've just been looking at some of the quotes that you made over the years, and I just highlighted some of them because I resonate with them, and I think that they are poignant statements that need to be shared more broadly. And again, you probably been quoted all over the place, but basically in one place you were saying that the downside of the racial divide and racial construct is that a white person can grow up and not have that interaction with Black people, not knowing any Black people to invite, not only to be in their wedding party, but in the audience. And there's not even a knowledge there's not even an awareness of what you have lost by not having it. Could you just elaborate on that a little bit? Because what I'm hearing a lot in Madison is, Alex, there's not a lot of Black people in my neighborhood, so they don't have any knowledge of the old covenants that didn't allow Blacks to live in Nakoma or live in Shorewood. For those of you who are from the Madison area, so they don't even look at the history of why we're so segregated. But I think that point is so key that when people begin to awaken a little bit, the first response is, well, I don't know any Black people. I don't even know where to go to meet people, but they haven't even counted the cost of what it means to them or their children to have had no people of color in their lives.
Yeah, that's the place where I really got could connect and I don't know how else to say it, feel the message of internalized superiority for me as a white person. Yes. That I could go cradle to grave, as most white people can, right? Live, love, work, play, and die in racial segregation. And from Black people in particular, and not one person who ever loved, mentored, or guided me growing up ever conveyed to me that I'd lost anything that mattered.
Right.
That is a deep message. In fact, it's the opposite, right? That white people measure the value of our schools and our neighborhoods by the absence of people of color and Black people in particular. Every day that we talk about a good neighborhood and a good school, we know what we're talking about. How are we measuring that? Honestly, the absence of a significant number of Black people.
Yes.
And to see that as good and nothing lost, the fundamental message is that there's no inherent value in the, perspectives, experiences, or in relationships across race for white people. In fact, not having those increases the value of basically everything for us as white people. That is a very deep message.
Yes.
I'm never going to say the N word, but that segregated life, I think, is so internalized. Our white neighborhoods are not a fluke. They didn't, just happen.
Exactly.
I didn't just happen to grow up in a primarily white neighborhood, right? This is the result, as you pointed out, of decades of policies and practices. De jure in the past, de facto in the present. White people will go across town. We will be incredibly inconvenienced to get our children into a quote unquote better school. Right. But, oh, gosh, I don't know anybody of color and I don't know how to meet them. If you cared, you'd put the energy into figuring that out.
Yes, you would.
It's really not that difficult.
Right. Because white people are resourceful. If they really wanted, or if someone had made it a value for them, it would have happened. I almost feel that when people have that conversation with me, they want me to validate that there are too few Blacks. And so please acknowledge that, because I've adopted cross-culturally. As a white couple, we've adopted Black children. We've done enough, and we have no Black friends. And I try to say, you got to find them. And they look at me and say, well, they're not in my communities. Where do I go to find Black people? And I say, for the sake of your children, even if you have not realized the value, I've watched what's happened in situations like this where children are afraid of their own culture. And I watch how that plays out on middle school playgrounds. And so I think you're absolutely right. Too few people have really valued what that means to have those cross-cultural relationships, particularly ones that are deep and meaningful.
Yeah, if we're looking for challenging this system to be convenient for us as white people, that isn't going to happen. It's not comfortable and it's not convenient. The status quo of this society is racism. It's not an aberration.
Right.
It is the norm, and all of our institutions effectively and efficiently reproduce racial inequity. And that status quo of racial inequity is comfortable for me as a white person 24/7. We are not going to get to where we need to go from a place of white comfort and convenience. It takes, building our tolerance for discomfort and actually, getting out of that comfort zone and putting some effort into changing.
Sure. Dr. DAngelo, as you've talked with people, what makes the realization of what you just stated, that racism is the norm, it's the rule and not the exception? Is it the fact that if I'm white, I'm going to lose what I thought was earned through meritocracy? Is it that emotionally I cannot fathom that my idealism of America has been built on this falsehood? Is it the guilt? Is it all the above? What I understand that these things are real because I look at history. But for white people who listen to what you're saying, that this is the norm, and what are they afraid of losing, or what are they afraid of becoming if they acknowledge what you just stated and what you and I believe to be true?
I think, yes, all of the above, right? There's not one single kind of thread. There's all of those threads. Probably at the base is what I call the good bad binary. That it's this very simplistic idea that only people who are consciously and intentionally mean across race are racist, and they're not nice people. And so, if I'm a nice person, I can't be racist. I mean, whenever it is suggested in the popular culture that somebody's behaved in a racist way, what's the first thing they do? Get all their friends to say what nice people they are. So we often become very irrational on this topic, particularly if we're challenged. I think this will maybe be controversial for your listeners, but I don't know how you could talk about racism without having to be controversial. I think at a fundamental level, we actually think this racist status quo is appropriate because we are fundamentally better people and we deserve to be where we are. From the time I opened my eyes, that message has been circulating. I have internalized it. I think those of us who are white need to take a really hard, honest look at internalized superiority. That this setup is righteous, even morally righteous, again, because we're fundamentally better people.
Sure.
And there are many, many ways that can help you access that message and challenge it, but nobody misses it, right? So that's one piece. Another piece is what I call the good-bad binary, this idea that only intentionally mean people can be racist, right? That racism consists of acts by people who don't like, others based on their race and want to hurt them. I mean, that definition just functions so beautifully to protect the system of racism because it exempts virtually all white people from that system, right?
Yes.
And I think it's the root of a lot of white defensiveness. So that if you were to suggest right now that the way that I'm talking about this, for example, is revealing a racist worldview that I'm not aware of, I'm going to hear that as you just said I had a bad moral character.
Right.
That and that can't be true because I don't.
Right.
And I didn't mean to do that, therefore it shouldn't count. And we've heard it all. So that understanding of what racism is in dominant culture also helps hold it in place, and you get the reactions that you get. Individualism is a very precious ideology for white people.
Of course.
Now, racially, it's only granted to white people, but this idea that, I could just have decided to be completely unaffected by the water I'm swimming in, and that you need to see me as separate from that water and separate from all other white people. I think probably the number one thing that gets white people defensive whenever I give a talk is generalizing about white people.
Sure.
We don't like to be generalized about. And, I get lots of emails, about, how each person who's writing me is different from everything I'm saying, which for me proves my point. But yes, we are individuals. We are also members of a racial group by virtue of that membership. We could literally predict whether my mother and I were going to survive my birth. It's so significant, and we have to be willing to grapple with the collective experience of being a member of this racial group. And everything that we see as special and unique about ourselves as white people, just ask yourself, well, how did that set me up into the racial hierarchy?
Exactly.
Because it did, right? I grew up poor, you grew up middle class. How did our class positions set us up? They certainly didn't exempt us.
Sure. I talked to so many folks who have said, hey, Alex, my grandmother came here. She couldn't speak the language. She took a boat from Poland and look, she got a job. Her parents weren't here. She sent money back home when they got her siblings, but they don't count in the social construct of race. What she had access to, that when she dressed up, put on a nice dress, when her husband put on a nice suit, when they decided to be white and not Polish American, Irish American, Italian American, it gave them different. It gave them different access, and I have just understood that that's just such a difficult concept for folks to grab, because again, they're looking at it as an individual, that your grandmother came over, but she was welcomed into a whole system as long as she was white. She could get HUD loans, she could get FHA loans. Her husband could go to war and come back and get a GI Bill and acquire wealth by buying a house. Folks don't realize that was kept that was kept away from so many people. Like here in Madison, my organization has created a U.S. Black History course. We call it History for a New Day, and it's mainly for white individuals. We have tenured faculty members from the University of Wisconsin come and teach. And what's interesting is that when people show up, and it's designed for white people, they look around and they say, we thought we were going to talk about Black history with Black people. We didn't know it was going to be a room full of white people and white people on the stage, almost as if they're sickened by the fact that they're in a sea of whiteness and we're going to talk about race. How am I going to learn about my racism with white people? I need Black people here to teach me what racism is. And that's from my progressive friends in a college town like Madison.
Well, let's be honest. They're only sickened by a sea of whiteness when the topic is race. I mean, we live in a sea of whiteness that we're not sickened by.
They're not sickened by it by downtown Rotary. I mean,
no.
I think our Rotary is only eclipsed by Seattle, which has like one of the nation's largest. But you're right. When they're in that white space, downtown exclusive clubs, you're right. They're not sickened by it at all.
No, they weren't sickened by their wedding being all white. I mean, I want to say that because it's not just
right.
The upper classes, right? So a couple of things.
Sure.
One, it behooves us. It behooves us not to see this, right? It behooves us to tell that story because it exempts us from the benefits that we gain from being white. It protects the racist status quo.
Yes.
Right? Which we are invested in protecting. I mean, that's the question that has never failed me. It's not, is this true or is this false? But how does that narrative function? What happens when you're trying to talk about your experience as a black man, when you're trying to get racism on the table and a white person moves to that narrative? What does it do? Well, it exempts them from any part of the current, hierarchy. It
Sure.
takes racism off the table. It silences you, and it closes the exploration. And in doing that, it functions to protect the racist hierarchy and the white position within it. And I can't help but notice, when do we want to say that the past shapes us?
Right.
When do we want to invoke our grandmothers or our great-grandmothers? And then when do we want to say, gosh, get over it, slavery ended?
Right. And not taking into account that there was a system or a systemic way of thinking that even made slavery possible. And even when slavery was illegalized, the mentality and the attitude was not illegalized because you can't legislate relationships or attitudes. And so what people forget is the infrastructure that created slavery and made it possible also created Jim Crow and separate but equal realities, and that hasn't gone away. And we're trying to get at that.
Right.
It's also very interesting to me that 400 years of slavery seems to mean nothing to many whites because that was years ago, but 60 years of affirmative action has completely ruined our country. So 4 centuries of forced and free labor, that's over. Just get over it, black people. But this frickin' 60 years of affirmative action, which gave kickbacks to white organizations. I mean, it wasn't just, working for people of color. It's just so interesting. You measure 60 years and 400 years, and people think that we can ruin the country in 60, but we have completely gotten over 400 years of slavery.
Well, and also, yes, and look at the outcome of affirmative action. It was a relatively toothless program that only applied to public companies or private companies with 50,000 employees or 50,000, and it benefited white women more than any other group. If you look around, I think it's pretty clear affirmative action, which is almost completely gone at this point, has, it's made a difference, but not a great difference. Right. It has been said, when you're used to 100%, 98 feels oppressive.
That is so true. And the fact that affirmative action has had such a powerful and positive impact for white women who have not practiced intersectionality, which is a concept that my daughter, who's a grad student, has helped me to understand, that even among women, it did not build a sense of solidarity across the racial lines to really bring black women along. And so I just think it's important for those who are in progressive towns like my own. And I've chosen to stay in Madison. So I don't say what I do to bash it, but I say what I do because I want Madison to wake up and to really be a place that's progressive and not just a place that really talks about it.
Hey everybody, hope you've been enjoying the episode today so far. This is Tyler, I'm the podcast manager.
And this is Eli, I'm the audio engineer for the podcast. And Tyler, I just had a burning question that I needed to ask you.
What's that, Eli?
How do you like your grits?
I am a grits with shrimp and cheese fan.
Oh, you are fancy.
Throw in some andouille, is that how you say it? Sausage as well?
Yes, yeah. I like to go for the butter and sugar.
Okay,
so
all right, sounds cool.
I like to go full on. A little bit of salt. Yeah.
With salt too?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, why do you ask that, Eli?
Well, we've got some great opportunities for people to get involved in the Black Like Me podcast. So if you've been looking for a way to get more access to Dr. G, to get some special content, some special features of the show, you can go to patreon.com/ patreon.com/blacklikeMe and become a supporter of the show, like a friend of the show.
Oh, that's awesome. Just go to patreon.com/blacklikeMe. Check it out.
Yeah, and we've got those different tiers, including the grits levels that we were just talking about.
Do we have grits with shrimp and cheese?
Oh, we sure do.
Oh, my goodness. That's
so
fantastic.
show some love for the show and how you like your grits, or maybe you're just a cream of wheat person. That's okay, too.
Yeah.
And check out the website because we've got some really special tiers that we didn't even talk about yet that you're going to want to check out. So we're going to get you back to this episode. Thanks for listening.
I want to bring up something that I saw, another quote of yours, or maybe it's a discussion starter in the guide for your book, White Fragility, but I loved it. When we often talk about racial barriers in governmental and corporate organizations, we think of white men. We even have the phrase, the man, stick it to the man. The man's trying to keep us down. You know, outside of my church work, I also run a nonprofit that I started 27 years ago. I bump heads with white women all the time because white men are not dominant in this world. I mean, in this field. And so when I started creating a movement called Justified Anger, and I said, Black people have got to create an agenda, many of my white colleagues who are women went to our mutual funders and they said, G is creating this work and he's being exclusive. He's not telling us what's going on. And then I've been in meetings like with my alma mater, the University of Wisconsin, other places, when many times I've called these colleagues on the carpet, the tears, the crying. And I'm not trying to state for my friends on Black Like Me, I'm not just trying to say because someone's female, they're emotional and they cry at the drop of the hat. I'm 55 years old. I have seen more white women cry over race than anything else in the workplace. And am I crazy? Can you help me speak to it? I talk to Black women in this space. They say, hey, Alex, white women ain't nothing nice when it comes to power structure because there's still the sense of white privilege. But then when the tears start flowing, it stops the whole meeting. And we're forgetting that we were talking about how a child was treated, how a family was treated, how a woman was treated. And all of a sudden, all the attention goes to the person who says, I thought we were better than this. I thought by being a white woman, I understand oppression too. Da 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 da. Can you help me with that? I guess you can hear my emotion on this, Dr. DiAngelo. I just need you to calm me down. What is going on with white women in these places?
Well, I mean, you pretty clearly and beautifully laid that out. So let me just say, white women, we do not land any more lightly on people of color. We are in no way have been consistently allied with people of color. And I actually think when white women don't back people of color, that the hurt and the betrayal is deeper. Because we have a potential way in through sexism and patriarchy, and we so often use it as a way out. So all of the dynamics that we see that we might complain about from men, we are manifesting across race, right?
Wow. I agree.
Yeah. So there's a photo that I often show in my slides of this. It's the House Freedom Caucus. So it's a room just filled 100% with white men around a conference table, and talk about what would it be like to be in that room, as a woman, and your job is to help them see their sexism, and all the women are like, yeah, and I'm like, would you want to sign up for being the one all by yourself to go in there and try to talk to those men about sexism? And all the women like, oh God, no. And then I flash a photo of a conference table, all white women. And then I say, women of color, you want to go in there and help those white women see their racism? And they're all like, oh, God, no, right? And my point is, I can be in that first room filled with men and experience all kinds of sexism, and I can be in that second room and be perpetrating all kinds of racism.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So I am not exempt from any of those patterns. And there's a Black woman I often co-lead with. Her name is Erin Trent Johnson. And she says that the room full of white women, that room is way scarier for me. That is the most treacherous room for me. Because the moment I am smart, the moment I am strong, they're going to feel threatened, and they're going to rally around each other, right? I don't have expectations, she says, in that room filled with white men. But in the room filled with white women, the white women are going to assume there's some kind of shared woman sisterhood. There's no more a shared woman's experience than there is a shared human experience.
Right.
In a society, on the physical plane, in a society that's just profoundly separate and equal by race and gender. So white women, we have to stop using our resentment about sexism, which, is quite rational.
Right.
We have to stop using it to exempt ourselves. We have to start using it as a way in. So whenever I don't understand a piece of racism, I just change the roles in my head. And I imagine that a man is saying to me, on sexism, what I'm kind of wanting to say around race, and I'm like, oh, I got it, right?
Right.
And as you said, part of being white is not having to understand our history and that we bring it with us. And I might see myself as Robyn, your colleague, but I'm pretty sure you see me as Robyn, my white colleague. And when I start crying, I am a white woman crying.
Yes.
And there is a history of terror that is invoked through those tears. I just need to say Emmett Till. And, that history is invoked. But part of being white is I don't have to attend to any of that. I just see myself as entitled to indulge in whatever I'm feeling right now. And I may not be conscious, but the tears do have an impact on the room. Because as soon as I cry, all of the resources are going to get channeled back to me. And now you're going to become the aggressor.
Yes.
Right? And I'm going to become the victim. So you're sharing about your victimization.
Wow.
I start to cry, and all of a sudden you're the aggressor, and everyone's comforting me. And whatever it was you said that caused me to cry is long forgotten.
It's long forgotten. And then I don't want to be the black man that's coming down hard on someone who's a white woman. And my sister, who works in nonprofit space, says, then she gets categorized as the bitchy black woman who's rolling her neck, who's got an attitude. And so when we stand up for ourselves, we get all this pushback.
White people, we need to ask ourselves, why is my heart not breaking, right? Where is my grief? Where are my tears? But our tears have impact on other people. So where, when, and why I'm crying needs to be attended to. I just want to be really clear about that, because it's not as if we should not access that pain. But again, how and when and where we access it has political impact.
Again, my movement, the initiative of my nonprofit is called Justified Anger. It's about 6 years old. And our history class is a part of it. We're doing work with emerging black leadership development, and we're helping to work with systems to, whether they're educational or corporate, to really think about how we empower them to dismantle racism within their ranks. But it's interesting, for 6 years, white men who in corporate leadership roles, foundation roles, have tried to challenge me to change the name from Justified Anger, then having a meaningful conversation with me about why does the anger persist. Yeah. Alex, you're a black man living in Fitchburg. You live in a nice home. You've been married 31 years. You, your mom, your sister, your wife, now your daughter all have degrees from the University of Wisconsin. My daughter's a grad student. Alex, you have an earned doctorate degree. And so it feels like a sidebar. Like, Alex, we get that some people are angry, but come on, you're just like us. You live next door to us. Your daughter went to Catholic school. Come on, just drop. You're not really angry. It's not really that bad. So I'm finding that I'm marginalized as a black male who's seen as angry, because it almost licenses people to not have to take me seriously. And I'm not irrational. I'm not yelling, like while the mayor's trying to give a speech, but I'm a writer. I'll give speeches. I'll preach about it. I'll bring groups together in our history class and I'll talk about it. But as I gain more momentum and as more white people begin to listen, I feel that I'm more alienated by white men in leadership who used to love me 10 years ago. I'm the most tenured minister in our city. When I was just the nice example, I was the poster man of what could happen if you're black and your mom's on welfare and you could become this civic community leader. But when I start challenging the systems, I get tremendous pushback from my friends, particularly my white male friends who are in corporate leadership roles. I've got a couple that are not like that, but I've had so many sidebars like, why don't you call it justified action? Why don't you call it justified ability? Why don't you call it justified advancement? So I guess all of that to say, what's so fearful about a black man being angry at the status quo for many whites in society? What is that? What is that country? You know what? And I'm sorry, I don't mean to do for you what people do for me. I don't want you to speak for all white people, but I feel like you're a colleague and you're a resource. And so to give me just a cross section of it, but the fact that I'm black and I'm angry now, I'm still at the table. Part of my mission is to help my white colleagues get this and walk across the line in order to be allies. I don't try to convince, Charlottesville racists that they're wrong, but the progressives who want to make a difference. I have really, whether it's the leadership of my church, leadership of my nonprofit, I've been consistent in really building that bridge because I grew up in Madison. So many of my relationships, most of them were with white people. But when I've emerged as someone who's angry at the status quo, I'm really surprised at the sidebars people have with me. Like they're trying to calm me down, and I don't go off in meetings. I just say my experiences.
Okay. The first thought I had was how are those white colleagues measuring success? In other words, if you have success based on class, you should no longer care about injustice. You should no longer have any passion about injustice. Mm-hmm. So that's worth looking at, right? Yes. You have a house, you have an education. Why would you care or have emotion? It also presumes that within that middle class cultural context, you're not experiencing racism, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
I know it's patently not true. And there's this incredible arrogance that white people have, right? Like rather than tell you that you shouldn't feel that way, can you imagine the humility of us asking ourselves, well, what am I missing?
Right.
What don't I understand?
Absolutely.
What are the odds that I have some blind spots? And if Alex is expressing anger and hurt and pain, what am I not seeing rather than Alex needs to experience the world the way I experience it, which means don't actually have any care about racial injustice, right? So that's also going on. I just want to be really clear. Black anger and rage is rational. Black mistrust of white people and our schools and our teachers and our institutions is rational. Our lack of rage is irrational.
I love it.
Right? And, we have earned your rage and suspicion and mistrust. There's a deep history of harm between our groups, right? So we have to earn your trust. And we don't earn it by telling you that your rage is inappropriate, and we don't earn it by asking you to coddle our delicate sensibilities and use different language. I mean, again, back to how does it function? And I think you made that it's very clear how it functions when all the energy is on what we should call the group, right? So that we don't, cause any discomfort for white people, and how that prevents us from engaging with the, issues that you're trying to get onto the table. I want to say something about white progressives.
Yes.
Okay, so you may have heard me, Alex, make this this claim. White progressives, I think, cause the most daily toxicity for people of color living and working in primarily white environments like Madison.
See, now that statement right there is going to make us lifelong friends, Dr. DiAngelo. That statement right there. Keep going. You're preaching, sister. I need someone to say that. I need who looks like you, who sounds like you, who studied like you to say that. Because if we can crack that nut in Madison, we can really change things. Because I think people have the passion, but that facade of being progressive makes us think we've already arrived. So please keep going. I just had to give you an accolade. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, that's all right. Well, first of all, how am I defining a white progressive?
Sure,
right?
Sure, that'd be
helpful.
helpful.
I don't say white liberal because then people start thinking it's Republican versus Democrat.
Exactly.
A white progressive is any white person listening right now who thinks we're not talking about them.
Right.
A white progressive is any white person who thinks they're not racist, less racist, who's thinking about all the ways they're an exception to everything we're talking about, who's sitting here thinking about all the other white people who really need to be hearing this conversation, whose number one question is going to be, how do I tell another white person about their racism? That is a white progressive. And I think that we are the most challenging because we're so arrogant in our certitude that it isn't us. so we put our energy in making sure you know it isn't us, right? All our credentials,
right,
which of course aren't remotely convincing to you,
right.
And we tend to be incredibly defensive about any suggestion that we may not be as progressive racially as we think we are, right? So I think I imagine that as a black man, it would be terrifying to have to interact with a Richard Spencer, right? Richard Spencer is what I would call an avowed racist.
Definitely.
He organized the march in Charlottesville. I mean, I think it would be terrifying to have to interact with him, but odds are you're not interacting with him on a daily basis. You're interacting with me.
Right.
Right? And I am the one who's sending you home on a daily basis, agonizing all night about whether you should just endure the indignity that I inflicted on you in that meeting or whether you should try to talk to me about it. And then having you decide, you know what, odds are it will get worse if I try to talk to her about it. I'll just endure it.
And
right?
she may take revenge. You're right. With the Richard Spencer,
sure.
I know how to dodge him, or I know how to put my defense mechanisms up. You touch upon something that creates a mystery for white progressives in the area where I live, Madison and the greater Madison area. Many African Americans who have served to make this community great are buying land in South Carolina, North Carolina, Mississippi. They're moving to Atlanta. They're moving to Dallas. We're about to experience the greatest migration of blacks from the north to the south in the history of this country. And it is completely mystifying my white colleagues because in the South, and I'm not saying every person in the South who's white is racist, but where there is racism, don't go. Like I have a friend who told me he's from Stone Mountain. He said when he would go to certain places, the Rangers would say, "Hey, the Klan's meeting on the east side over there, so you might want to stay over there. Just go over here." Like the Klan are out here, but they're not going to bother you. You're going to go over here and cook out. In Madison, you're right. Everyone's got Black Lives Matter in their yard. They've got they talked about who they're reading and coats and all these things that they're quoting, but still they don't have black friends. They're not in black space. They're not dismantling racism, and they're rattling off the podcast that they're listening to, but not anything that they're doing personally. And so it completely stupefies my white colleagues to think that there's more rest for the black soul in the racist parts of the South than in the progressive places like Wisconsin, Minnesota, et cetera. They don't get it, because we're not dealing with the facade of this pseudo progressive mindset.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking I'd rather deal with someone who I know is a misogynist so I can avoid him than someone who has deeply internalized misogynist attitudes and is in complete denial about it.
Yes.
That, again, is much more treacherous. And you've named what happens when you try to even just, say, I want to speak to my anger. Can we soften that and not do that? I want to say, you said that you're not saying all white people are racist, so I'll go ahead and say it.
No, I'm sorry. Yeah. I was saying No, you're right.
I understand why you don't want to say it, but I'm going to say it.
You're going to say it. Go ahead. Say it again.
I'll go. All white people are racist, and only white people are racist. And if you're white and you're listening to that and you're upset by that, then it's on you to evolve and figure out, why am I saying that? Not, I'm wrong to say that. What are you missing that you don't understand why I would say that? Again, if we define racism as individual acts of intentional, aware meanness, then of course not all white people are racist. But racism is not that. It is a system. Exactly. And we're swimming in it. We've internalized its messages, and they come out of our pores. And it's on us to figure out how that message of superiority comes out of our pores, but not if. Sure. We have to change the question from if to how. So let me give an example that really gets white progressives nice and unsettled. I am not any less racist than Trump.
Ooh, I'm with you, but go ahead on. What's the difference then?
All right. Yes. So first of all, I'm younger than Trump. I'm not that much younger. Mm-hmm. I grew up in the same water. I swim in the same water. Yes. And there's nothing that comes out of his mouth that I don't recognize. And if white people are being honest, there aren't things that come out of his mouth that haven't shocked me because they flashed across my own mind in a moment. Right?
That's just the truth.
Even you probably have been taken aback. Oh, my God, I can't believe I just had such a racist thought, right? Mm-hmm. So I recognize all of his racism, and I have, on some level, absorbed very similar messages and ideas. It's not useful for me to position him as the racist and me as not the racist, because the moment I do that, I'm going to exempt myself. I'm going to be complacent, and I'm going to be defensive. There is a difference between us, right?
Yes.
And it's not in how much racism we have. The difference is he embraces and uses, I would say, wallows in his racism. He uses it to political ends, and I try, to the best of my ability, to challenge my racist conditioning. But we're both on the same continuum. We may be on different spots in different moments, but that's the other piece. I'm not in a fixed location on that continuum.
Sure.
In some moments, I act in anti-racist ways, but in some moments, I choose silence and complicity and comfort. And in those moments, I'm not that far away from him.
That's a very gutsy and honest statement, Dr. DiAngelo. I appreciate that. One of the analogies I use here in Madison is that we're surrounded by 4 beautiful lakes, but we're having an issue with phosphorus and with algae, and it's affecting or infecting the fish. And so the fish aren't bad, and they're not polluting the lakes, but the lakes are harming them. And so I try to explain to my white colleagues, when I talk to you about your racism, I'm not saying that as an individual you're burning a cross on my lawn, but I'm saying that to some extent you've been infected by this by these lies, by these falsehoods, by falsified history, that you've been infected in a way that you become a part of the problem and you benefit from the problem. But fish aren't creating the problem, but they are sickened because of it. And so I try to help my white colleagues to understand that to the degree I could help you to understand your racism, you can get better. But if you ignore this, it's going to sicken you and make you worse. And so you really need what we're talking about to come to the light and get better, because it's underlying fear that you're going to be discovered for not being all that society has told you are is really problematic. And so that's a way that I've tried to approach it with people in understanding this. And then the second part of it is in Madison, and this is probably how progressives roll, but I've had several people tell me the worst thing that they can be called is a racist. And I'm thinking, come on, with all the abuse against children being separated from their parents and put in cages, there are a lot worse things to be in life than racist. And so black people of color, are assuming not that white people are evil, but that they're racist because of the definition I just gave about being infected, the definition you just gave. There's the assumption. So the sooner you acknowledge it, the more we can get to a whole nother place. And to your point that I saw in one of your quotes, I have found that it is easier to build deeper cross-cultural relationships with white colleagues who have never come in contact with black people and own it than progressives who immediately have dropped the N-word because they told me, well, when I was 16, I used to be a good baller, and so the fellas used to let me say it. And so they try to transport that experience 30 years in the future and then drop it on me over a Cobb salad, while they're trying to coach me and speaking at their event. So they drop the N-word to show me that it has no power in their minds, and that it doesn't, that they're so far above it they can say it and not be impacted by it. That's what I experienced with progressives. I don't have people saying that to me when I'm in Mississippi.
Yeah, I just have to say, on behalf of my fellow white people, I apologize to you for that. I just want to say that, that somebody would drop that word over your lunch and tell you it has no meaning. I'm very sorry.
Thank you.
So let me be clear. Everyone has racial bias.
Yes, yes.
You're just as racially biased as I am. But when you back one group's racial bias with legal authority and institutional control,
when you sanction it,
transformed. And that's what I mean when I say only white people are racist and all white people are racist. I love that you use those lakes as an example, because I just had the honor of having a meeting with Resma Menicum, who wrote My Grandmother's Hands. He's a black man who specializes in racial trauma.
Sure.
And he says, don't look at the shark, look at the water, right? So we might think that Donald Trump is a shark, but he's in the water,
Yes,
and
he
we're
is.
in the water too. Those fish are in that water, and they're swimming in it, and they're consuming it. And that's how those of us who are white have to think about getting in touch with what we've consumed, right?
Yes.
And it's Ibram Kendi, in his book, Stamped from the Beginning, says, we're not the creators of racist ideology, but we are the consumers of racist ideology.
See, that's
and
powerful.
no white person can miss consuming racist ideology. This is what I mean when I say I have a racist worldview as a white person. How could I not? So it's on us to try to identify how we've consumed it, how it's coming out in our relationships and our work, and then how we might change it.
Sure. That's good. This is going to help folks who are listening. It's going to help them tremendously, because I'm finding that the bulk of my listeners are white, who are really trying to lean in to racial issues, and they're just trying to understand them more. How has this work helped or encouraged you to build stronger cross-cultural relationships? Because one of the questions I hear among African Americans when someone who is white, develops a hit podcast or writes a New York Times bestseller about race or something, they wonder, does it open doors, or do those folks still feel the need to build cross-cultural relationships? And so I know that's personal, but I know people who are listening are wondering, do you have cross-cultural relationships? Has this work enabled you to build more meaningful cross-cultural relationships, particularly with African American people?
Oh, absolutely. So the first thing I want to say is this is the most liberating premise I can imagine. The premise that as a white person, I have a racist worldview, I have racist biases, I have racist patterns, and I have investments. In the racist status quo, which is why I can't be trusted to determine how well I'm doing, right? Challenging that status quo. Starting from that premise is liberating, right? I can stop defending, deflecting, denying, explaining, minimizing, deflecting, all those things that we do to avoid that, and just get to work aligning what I say I value with the actual practice of my life. Like, what does it mean to say everyone's equal and live segregated from them, right? What are we really teaching our children when we talk about how good their neighborhood and school is, precisely because it's segregated, right?
Right.
So it is liberating, and I do now have relationships across race and with Black people that I would not have had if I just followed the trajectory laid before me, right? I don't have to do anything. Just follow the trajectory laid out for you as a white person, and odds are very, very high that you will live a segregated life. If you're urban and white and poor, in your early life, you may have cross-racial relationships.
Sure.
But upward mobility will take you away. And
Definitely.
you will, if you're going to move up, you'll move into whiter and whiter spaces. And I think we always know that. Any white person listening who is going to that, but I grew up poor, I would ask you to read my essay, My Class Didn't Trump My Race, because I grew up in poverty.
Sure.
And I also always knew I was white. Come on. Please.
Yes.
So, yes, I absolutely have those relationships. And I know that I need to be accountable as a white person who's granted credibility and authority on race, right? I'm very clear that my work centers whiteness. I mean, I don't know any way out of that dilemma, because it centers whiteness, but also I do believe it decenters whiteness by exposing whiteness, because that water stays the water because we don't see it, right? And so to decenter it in a very curious way, you have to make it more visible. So I donate a percentage of my income to racial justice organizations that are led by people of color. I have people of color in my life who have agreed to play that kind of coach and go-to and talk through things with, and I pay them for that.
Come on now.
I want to be really
That's
clear.
what I'm talking about, Dr.
Yes,
DiAngelo. Come on. So they're not just your little freebie Black friends who'll come and just...
No.
Thank you.
No,
Thank you.
You are welcome. having black friends is not an accountability practice. I just want to be it's not. And it's not for you. I mean, if you're my friend, you may want to school me on occasion. But that is not where, my expectation that that is what you need to give me. I would pay you for your time. There are also white people in my life with a very strong analysis that I can call when I need to process my feelings. Let's say you called me in right now. Mm-hmm. I may feel embarrassed. I may feel defensive. It is not for you to hold or have to bear witness to that. So I would call a white friend and say, I need to talk, I need to vent, that I could get clearer and come back and repair with you. These are just some examples of how white people can be accountable, but without that, just carrying on, no.
No, that's so helpful because what's becoming popular in the circles of my friends, I stopped this a long time ago because I started telling white corporations, I'm not in the business of keeping you in business, but I can be, but you have to hire me. Mm-hmm. But you can't just assume because I'm a black minister or a black nonprofit executive that it's my job to find you black staff. But I'm hearing of white CEOs, men and women, who have said to black staff, I want your job to be telling me when I've said something inappropriate. And there's a young lady I know who's she's no longer at that organization, but her boss told her, it's your job. And she said, that's not my job. She, oh, yeah, it's in your job description. So on a good day, you can call your boss out. But on a bad day, you call your boss out in front of other colleagues. How does she not think that her job can be jeopardized? Yeah. But I'm finding in a community like this that people think that they're open by saying, hey, if I ever say anything that's inappropriate, come and tell me. And black people are thinking, no, we're not. First of all, we don't want that pressure. Two, you're the executive director of this organization. And three, I could then be pegged as an angry black woman inside this organization who's always got issues. And so I'm not going to get letters of recommendation, nor am I going to be promoted inside this company. But I know of several colleagues who have been told that that's their role.
So I just want to point out for your white listeners that throughout this conversation, you have explained and laid out all of the moves white progressives make, or many of the moves. So this is the stuff, right? This isn't the I said the N-word stuff. This is the attitude and the entitlement and the expectation. So let me break down what's problematic about that woman's boss saying that to her.
Yes.
So the first thing is, it puts all the emotional weight and labor and psychic energy and heavy lifting on the person of color.
Yes, it does.
And the white person can just walk away, hey, let me know, and carry on with no effort whatsoever. It's a colonialist relationship. You do all that work and all that labor and take all that risk, and I will receive the fruits of your labor, and I will examine those fruits. And let's be honest, and I will determine which of them I think are legitimate and which of them
Exactly.
But I will do, because that's also what's going to happen, is when she tells this boss what she's experiencing, they're going to sit back and feel qualified to determine what of it is valid and what isn't. And that's another dynamic of it. But again, I get to just walk away and carry on and just, you'll let me know. And it doesn't account in any way for the incredible difference in power and risk that takes. If any white women are listening, just imagine a man just said to you, hey, just let me know if I do anything sexist, and then just walked away.
Right.
Well, I mean, that is a huge risk, and our experiences.
You just did something sexist by putting that on me to tell you when you're being sexist.
Exactly. And how often, okay, I'll ask you as a black man, how often have you tried to tell a white person about some inevitable but unaware racist thing that they've said or done, and have that go well for you?
Right. Yeah. How's that working for you?
Honestly, right? How often that gone well for you? So now, with this deep, lifelong experience of being actually punished further by telling a white person, you just told me as your employee to tell you. Right. So there's that piece of it too. And then the final piece is that presumes that she understands what is racist in every moment and what isn't, right? I mean, if we go back to sexism, I was raised in patriarchy.
Sure.
Half the time I'm colluding with sexism. I don't even know how I'm colluding with it. So that's a lot to put on me to be super clear about, I'm certainly clearer about it than most white men are, but I'm not completely clear about it. So yes, that can be a piece of it, right, to convey and earn her trust that she could tell him. But it's also on him to get better at recognizing it himself. So she doesn't have to, right?
Exactly.
Where's his responsibility?
Exactly. Wow. Well, listen, Dr. DiAngelo, I really appreciate your time and your insight. Let me say that again. Dr. DiAngelo, I really appreciate your time and your insight. And I think that you have spoken powerfully into my context, because I'm working with people in my community who really do want to make a difference, but I think it's the facade of being progressive that hinders it. And I just believe that our discussion today will give people something to listen to and to process further, because I believe the goodwill is here. And in many folks, it's here if we can get away from the sticker shock of what it's going to cost us to really be anti-racist. People in our history class can't just come and objectify the information and say, wow, that was thought-provoking, and not count the cost of how that has benefited them and worked against others. That our white colleagues must do work among themselves to dismantle this, and not just see to it that it's incumbent upon people of color to fix it. So,
and can I make a couple? I have 3 final points I want to make.
Please. No. And I should have asked you that. Please do it.
That's okay. So there's a concept that I think of as credentialing, right? All of the evidence white people give to convey or signal that they're not racist, right? And I would ask your listeners who are white, how do you credential yourself, right?
Great question.
And if I told you that people of color notice when we're doing that, how do you think it's actually impacting the conversation, right? And one of the ways white people credential themselves is tell what they're reading, or sometimes people will try to credential themselves with me, right? Well, I've read your book. And my response to that is, well, how will people of color know you've read my book?
Great question.
Right? Or you do a workshop and you go around the table at the end, what's one thing you're going to do different? I'm going to continue to reflect on this. And my response is, and how will people of color know that you've continued to reflect on this? Like, what difference does it make if there isn't some actual behavior change?
Right.
And I want to make very clear, especially to Madison listeners, niceness is not anti-racism.
Yes.
And niceness is not courageous. So many white people think that, if I'm nice to you, Alex, and we're having this conversation and I'm smiling and I'm talking and we're going to lunch, I can't be racist.
Right.
We really have, I'm sure as you know, over that lunch, I could easily just little microaggression, little nick, little cut.
Yes.
Even as I'm smiling and talking, as you mentioned, over your Cobb salad, right? Niceness is better than meanness. I'm all for niceness, but that isn't anti-racism.
That's so
anti-racism is courageous and active. And any white person who's been listening to you and I and doesn't agree with us, I'm going to offer them a final question to sit with. What qualifies you to disagree with Alice and I on the topic of racism? Alice as a black man who, not just because he's a black man, but a black man who has devoted many years to this education and field, and me who has devoted 25 years to this education and field. What qualifies you to disagree with us? Is it possible that there's something you're missing, not us? And certainly there are people I see as qualified to disagree with me, but they're likely not the average white person.
Correct. That's a great question. That is fantastic. And with that,
all right.
I'm going to thank you again, Dr. DiAngelo. That's a powerful way to end the show. So please know that I respect your work tremendously. I appreciate the fact that you're out here in the field. And I just hope that in this work, our paths will cross again. And it just meant a lot to me to have you be a part of Black Like Me. And I know that this is going to carry great weight and it's going to help so many people. So thank you again for your time. And I look forward to connecting with you again sometime in the future.
You are so welcome. It was an honor and a delight.
I want to thank Corey Saffold and Marcus Fleming for creating the music for this podcast, my podcast manager, Tyler Nyland, my engineer, Eli Steenlich, my editor, Jeremy Holliday, and our intro and outro are recorded by Cynthia Woodland. And a special thank you to WORT Studios, where we record Black Like Me.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. You can find out more about Dr. Alex G's amazing work at www.alexg.com. Black Like Me is sponsored by the generosity of the Human Family Unity Foundation.